Welcome to Commander Central, episode 260, and today we're going to take a look at mechanics in Commander we dislike. I'm Dana.
I'm Max.
And I'm Chris.
What's up, boys? How's it going today?
Oh, awesome sauce.
It's great. It's Friday. It's beautiful out.
It's supposed to be like 80 tomorrow.
Can't complain.
80 and sunny. I got to go play at the shop this week for a couple hours. That was a good time. Everything's coming up Millhouse. It's feeling pretty good this year. As far as 2021 is already, this week already is better than anything that happened in 2020, I think.
Right.
So yeah, that was nice getting out. Somebody asked me if it was nice going back to the shop and playing. I was like, yeah, but it would have been fun going to like any gathering of people. It would have been like a dental convention discussing brushing techniques. It would have been nice just to be out of the house and hanging out with people.
I don't think I can back you on that one. I don't know if I can do that.
I'm with Chris on that. That
well,
seems like too much.
Since you work at the shop, Chris, you actually do get to go and hang out with people more frequently than I've been able to lately.
That's true.
I mean, Chris just sorted cards all night.
I did too. That sucked.
Until about 1 a.m. when I see some picture he posted in Slack of a melded Gisela and Bruna.
I don't know what you're talking about. Yes, I get to play after hours. After shops close, and we lock up and all that, and whoever's still around that wants to play, I get to jump in a game.
Well, and I had to come back in, so I left right as you guys were closing, and then stood in the parking lot BSing with our friend Dr. Mike for 15 minutes, and I had slugged down a giant 40-ounce bottle of water over the course of the last, two of them. I drank 2 of them. I refilled it once over the course of playing, and I had to go to the bathroom before I left, but I'm like, it's not that far of a drive to my house. And then I stood in the parking lot for 20 minutes talking to Dr. Mike, and then my wife had texted me during that saying, can you quick stop and pick up a prescription at this 24-hour pharmacy on your way home? And I'm like, yeah, sure, whatever. That'll take me 3 minutes. But the drive into 3 minutes at that point, after sitting in the parking lot and talking, I got to go back in and use back. It's just been too much. I drank way too much water, so I had to come back in and knock on the door to get let back in after you guys had the door locked. So I could go use men's room real quick. So that was the capper to my evening. But it was fun. I had a good time. I got to play some cool games. The one I will shout out here in mention is I was playing my Jeru deck, and number one for the second time I played it in a row, I've got to use the white counterspell Lapse of Reason, I believe it was.
Lapse of Memory.
Lapse of Memory, sorry. To counter a spell that saved my butt, so that always feels good. But I got to ult a Johnny Caller of the Pride. That's the one that makes X 2/2 cat tokens, where X is your life total. And I was at 38 life, so I made 38 cats. But Divine Visitation was in play, so that made 38 angels instead. And I had Catherine's Crusade out, so they were 38 angels with 38 +1 counters on them. But in response to that, the Phoenix player milled me down to 1 card left in my library. And I was trying to figure out, because I had a way, I could have bought myself a turn if I could have survived, but I had to draw my 1 card at the end of the turn off of having the Monarch. And then I died on my upkeep because I had nothing left to draw.
Oh, so I was...
And the Monarch is not optional, and there's no way to get rid of it either. Nothing I could do with it. So I was the Monarch was what actually wound up screwing me over that game.
I remember I heard about that, and you're like, I have 1 card left, and I leaned over, and I was like, Danny, you got that land in play that lets you put cards back on
I didn't. Yeah, I didn't have
it.
Is it Amiria the Skyruin, I think?
Something like that, yeah.
Yeah, I did not have it out either. I think that was one of the ones that got milled away. So, yeah. But you know what? It felt good. I had 38 angels, or 42 angels, I guess. So, that was, if you're going to die, you go big.
I guess.
And Max, you actually got to play this week a little bit.
I did. I played a handful of games on Saturday night with some listeners. The one I want to talk about is I was playing with Trent from EDH.Rec, his brother Trevor, and listener of the show John, and it was Brago versus a Togo and Silas Ren deck. John was playing his Niv Mizzet Super Friends deck, and then Trent was on Sig River Cutthroat, and I ended up winning the game with Brago via Approach of the Second Sun. But
nice.
I didn't have Brago out to do any fun shenanigans. It was pure just card draw off of Tezzeret and Master Artificer to keep digging me down 2 cards a turn, essentially, to get to that 7th card and then just cast it for the win.
Just cast the approach and hope you can get there.
Yep.
Was that the game, because you texted me that one night, it was 10 o'clock at night or something like that, and I just approached for the second time, and I was like, what?
Yep.
Very cool.
Yeah.
And I think we're actually going to get to play some games this Saturday night, I believe. So we will have already done it with Zach and Ryan from Commander Social as well.
Yeah, that'll be a good time.
Yeah, very cool. Well, if anyone out there in listener land have played some fun games or got to go to their LGS or did anything interesting, how would you go about getting a hold of us, Chris?
You can reach us on a multitude of social media platforms. You can find us on Twitter at CMDR Central. You can search us up on Facebook, CMDR Central. You can find us online at cmdrcentral.com, and you can also find us on YouTube by searching CMDR Central.
You can also head over to patreon.com/CMDRCentral. Check out our reward tiers, such as the Decks You Play shows, or just joining our community to chat with everybody and play some virtual EDH. This week, we want to say hello and thank you to the following new patron supporters: Ray Powell, Stephen Platt, Dylan Gibson, and Unstable Mountain. So thank you so much for supporting us. Helps keep the lights on, and I guess if we were together, me and Pants.
I think we have a contest wrapping up here the next week or so, too.
We do. We're giving away the Draina Kalistra Bloodchief deck I played on the Scrap Trawlers stream a while back, and we'll be announcing that winner to anybody who had supported us on Patreon through the month of April. We'll be announcing that next week.
Very cool. All right, gentlemen, should we jump into this main show topic here and talk about keywords we dislike?
Banding.
Let's do it.
Well, yeah, that's a good point. One of the things we try to do is like talk about ones that people actually, played or you saw. Now, it's easy to be like, hey, I don't like Splice onto Arcane, but has anyone ever actually seen a spell Splice onto Arcane before?
In Modern, I have.
Have you? I mean, I guess I've seen a ton of Kodama's Reaches. I just never ever see it spliced onto something. It's just a spell with Arcane that nobody ever splices.
Yeah.
So we wanted to stick to ones that we actually see and talk about them a little bit and explain why we don't like them. Maybe you disagree and that's fine, but we're going to just give you our perspective anyway. Some of this might be a little bit petty. At least my first one here is.
A couple of mine are as well.
Okay. So my first mechanic I dislike is Mutate from Aquaria. So this is a new one, and I'm probably going to be in a minority here because I believe it was fairly popular. But man, I am not a fan of Mutate at all.
Isn't Mutate similar to Champion?
No, Mutate's one where you get a whole stack of 14 different creatures that all basically are one creature.
Okay, I see.
More comparable to Bestow, I think.
Yeah, I never played Aquaria, and I don't think I've seen anyone mutate anything, so I don't remember how it works.
Yeah, because it wasn't, I don't think ever in, paper standard, because that was a set that hit right as COVID hit, so It's been one of those things that you haven't really seen it in person. So why do I not like it? Well, it makes me, as your opponent, do a ton of work, which is kind of annoying, that I have to work based on the cards you're playing. There's a gazillion rules to it, for one. I looked at the rules page for it today. It's 2,000 words long. Explaining the different exceptions and examples for Mutate. It's insane. You for making me have to learn all the rules for how Mutate works. That's super frustrating. And not only does it make me do a ton of extra work just to figure out how it works, it creates this ridiculous stack of cards because you can mutate as many creatures together as you're able to. So that I have to keep track of this ridiculous creature that's constantly changing. One of the things I've always disliked about Marisol the Pretender is I have to remember what random stronghold common you have imprinted on Marisol, or hey, I also have this alliance common, and I've got a 1984 Topps baseball card exiled with Marisol as well, and I don't remember what his batting average was that year.
Go Kirby Puckett.
Pay attention for all that for Marisol, and Mutate is that times 10. I just had it's just, you've created work for me as your opponent. They always say math is for blockers. Well, I don't want to do math based on who your commander is. So those are the main reasons Mutate frustrates me. But there's another one, and these are all ridiculous. Don't get me wrong. These are all petty, absurd reasons. But the last one that's equally petty and absurd is that I can't tell the Mutate commanders apart for some reason. Yes, when we had Khans of Tarkir, we had a bunch of dragons, but I knew who Silumgar was, and I knew who Dramoka was relatively quickly. I have never been able to figure out who any of those 5 Mutate commanders were from that set. Their names are all some random collection of mouth sounds, followed by something that's supposed to sound scary. So it's are you playing Barglefart, Apex of Doom? Or is that Stankwhistle, Apex of Darkness? Or is that Flansnargle, Apex of Hatred? I have no idea what the difference is between those 3 commanders, which is also super annoying. So it's just an annoying mechanic, and I've just now ranted for 5 straight minutes about Mutate.
That's awesome.
So that's my thoughts on Mutate. Either of you guys like it or dislike it?
I have no opinion one way or another, because like I said, I've never played against it, so...
There we go. How about you, Max?
I can't stop laughing. I guess I'm kind of in the same boat. I've played against a handful of different Mutate commanders. Again, I don't know which ones are which. And yeah, I agree, it's super complicated, and maybe I'd have a different opinion if COVID never happened and we saw it in person, in paper, but...
Yeah, maybe.
Especially over virtual EDH, it's a huge pain in the butt, because you can't look at all 12 cards in that stack, or,
Right.
You know, what I have learned is there's typically one that you need to care about, and that's it.
Yeah, yes, kind of. Like, I actually made the comment one time, like, it's easier to just kill the person than it is to figure out what their mutate creature is. It's just less work. So, Max, we'll throw it over to you here. What's your first keyword that you dislike?
Okay, first one I dislike is Improvise. This was brought out in Aether Revolt. It allows you to tap your artifacts to help cast spells, essentially. So it's Convoke, but you have to tap artifacts.
Okay.
And I think I don't like it because I don't understand why you would use it in EDH, because in EDH we have all these amazing mana rocks. You can't double dip with them. You can't tap your mana rock and say you used it for Improvise. You do one or the other, because it matters, like the Improvise is after you activate mana abilities. And so I was thinking about this the other night while playing on Saturday, actually. I'm like, I don't get Improvise. Like, I think I have an Improvise card in my Psi Master Thopterus deck. And I'm like, I don't want to tap my Thopters, because that's how I win. I don't need to double tap my mana rocks. What is the point of this card in Commander, unless you just have to cast some big old X spell like War of Invention or something else to win the game?
Yeah, I think it's one of those things that translated to Standard much better than Commander, because I totally agree. Whenever I've tried it, I've not liked it at all compared to Convoke. Number one, also, Convoke isn't just the colorless mana portion of the cost. Convoke can eat the colored mana portion of the cost.
Right.
Which can make a pretty big difference. My guess is the thought process in Improvise was it was in a block where you were making a ton of... There were some Thopter tokens, but there was also just a bunch of like construct tokens and
servo
tokens and that kind of thing. So that was one of those mechanics that, not that Convoke wasn't also made for Standard, it was, but I think Convoke just translates to EDH better, and so then you assumed that Improvise would work similarly, and it just doesn't, because even decks that aren't token decks tend to make accidentally tokens quite often. You always have creatures. You don't always have artifacts that aren't just mana rocks.
Right.
And it's one of those things that I don't think is obvious until you actually play Improvise and realize that it just isn't as easy to make valuable as Convoke was.
Yeah, totally agree. And it definitely does. I think you hit on the head. It feels like a draft mechanic for that Aether Revolt draft. But I see people talk about it on social media and how it's really great in their deck, and it's like, I don't get it. So maybe it's me.
Like an equipment deck or something where you can like tap your swords and stuff. Who cares? Right. That's a really narrow deck, whereas like I always feel like Convoke is pretty easy to make good in almost any deck for the most part.
Yeah.
I don't understand it neither. Aside from War of Invention, I don't understand it.
Okay. Yeah. Not the only one. Woohoo.
Yeah, all right. Well, Chris, what's your first pick here?
Well, let's see. Should I go petty like Dana, or should I go...
I'm really waiting for you to actually say banding.
I'm waiting for a big rant from you now, Chris.
I mean, because I picked a couple of them that are like no-brainers, because I hate them. I'm using the word hate. I mean, strong-worded hate out of that.
Well, I will quick throw this anecdote out here. We discussed it off the air, but originally this show was going to be called Keywords We Hate, and I had just wound up playing with Joseph Johnson the other night on stream of the I Hate Your Deck YouTube show, and he mentioned how many times they've ran into issues with having hate in the title of their channel and stuff, like registering email addresses and that kind of thing. So between that and us just talking about it in general, we're like, well, we'll just go with dislike as a less severe term, but... Originally, this was going to be, I hate Mutate. So go right ahead, Chris.
So I'm not going to talk about one that I hate right now. I'm going to talk about one that's more of on the petty aspect.
Okay.
And that's Proliferate. Proliferate, for me, the reason that I dislike this mechanic is because every deck that plays it, they sit and they dirtle, and they're doing a million things, and they're not actually accomplishing anything at the same time. Like, it's usually in a Super Friends deck, and then they sit for 30 minutes on their turn, upticking 12 planeswalkers, going through them, and then I'm going to proliferate, and then I'm going to alt, and then I'm going to do this, and then I'm going to do that, and nothing ever actually gets accomplished most of the time. And that's one of the reasons that I dislike Proliferate. Now, it's an amazing mechanic. I mean, the mechanic itself is sweet, cool. If you're playing like a Tezzeret's Gambit in a deck or something, if you get the Proliferate ability on something, that's cool to do. But a whole deck built around it, I despise it. It's annoying to play against. Now, what are your guys' opinions on it? Because I figured this would be one that would be kind of, people are like, what are you talking about? That one's amazing. And
it's a really good mechanic in that it's versatile. So like you can use it for poison counters. You can use it for, +1 or -1 counters. You can use it for loyalty counters on planeswalkers. You can use it for the, counter you put on your Everflowing Chalice or whatever. Like it has a ton of versatility, but you are 100% correct because it only adds one counter to something. It's not like doubling them. You wind up with people like trying to figure out their ideal sequencing. I'm going to do this thing, but I want to proliferate it first, which is going to give me the counter. So then when I do this thing, I can do this thing. I don't have a ton of it in my Zero deck, but like the same thing is true there. I'm like, okay, I want to make sure I do it before I tap my Everflowing Chalice so I can get the counter on there. Then I'll use the Chalice to activate this thing, and then I can proliferate with this thing over here. It absolutely, you're 100% correct. It does oftentimes lead to people taking extra long turns as they're sequencing things and like trying to get the maximum value out of it. And you don't always then win the game. A lot of times you do a lot of that dirtling and it maybe improves your position, but it doesn't get you to that win either.
Yes, that's like the biggest thing I've seen with it. Like if you're playing a Proliferate deck where it's like all +1/+1 counters on creatures, more power to you because that's just starting to scare me. Now, if you're playing all mono planeswalkers and stuff, then it's just like, okay, yeah, you got to do this like 12 million things. I'd rather see a 30/30 creature come flying at me off the Proliferate than 20 planeswalkers sitting there, waving at me from the distance.
Hello! I'm going from 5 to 6 counters.
I definitely agree with both what you guys both said. The fact that it does cause the durdle aspect or long turns if people aren't paying attention to the game and whatnot. And the other thing you said about it just being a very good mechanic overall, it is. The issue I have with Proliferate is I've seen like when, I'll hop into like our Brewing Corner channel in Slack where people post their deck lists for suggestions and stuff. And I've seen over time, like I'm running 1 or 2 planeswalkers. So that means I have to have all the Proliferate support stuff. I think Proliferate can be kind of like a trap mechanic where
for sure,
just because you only have a couple things you could possibly proliferate, you're going to add all those, Contagion class, Contagion engine, you're going to run all those extra support cards where they're only going to be supporting 2 or 3 cards of your 99. I think it's a challenging mechanic to brew around if you don't go both feet in at the same time.
Yeah,
agreed. Okay, we'll jump back to me. And this one is not going to be a petty rant necessarily. And this is, again, though, one that I think most people love, and that would be Morph. And the reason I don't love Morph necessarily is, number one, it does create weird rule effects because it doesn't use the stack. So very frequently, it's one of those cards where people wind up having to look things up or it stops play. That's just a thing that happens, but it does. But the second thing is it either occurs... There's either 2 uses for it for the most part. You either see it in like one of those Animar Morph decks or something where it's doing something super degenerate, which tends to lead to long turns, or you see it like there's a card you find that you want to run. You're like, oh, this has Morph. You're like, but I'm never going to use it because I only have 1 Morph card in my deck now. And it seems kind of pointless to use it then at that point. And then you feel like, well, now it's a wasted keyword. I now have this extra thing on my card that I'm not really going to use. It's probably using up kind of some of the value the card can have in a mechanic that you're just not going to be able to take advantage of. So either it's a situation where it's very all or nothing. Either it's just doing something that you're so involved in the mechanic that it's going to be really super degenerate, or it's just kind of wasted. And I don't know how you would fix that, because I do think like conceptually it's a cool mechanic, but the way it plays out, it's just very, very all or nothing. Also, Megamorph was a huge disappointment. I remember, everyone was, because we got Morph in the first Khans of Tarkir set, and then in Fate Reforged we got Manifest, which was actually kind of a neat variant on Morph. So then everyone was kind of looking forward to what the third one was for Dragons of Tarkir, and we got Megamorph, which was a huge downer when you were waiting for like some third cool variant, and it was not.
Have a +1/+1 counter and do the same thing you were going to do anyways.
And the last thing, if you're playing a deck that isn't a Morph deck, it's always Willbender. If someone has a random morph in their deck, it's just going to be Willbender. So yeah, I just that's why I don't love morph. I think it's a neat concept, but usually I don't think it plays out in very interesting ways.
Yeah, the biggest thing for me for morph is, like you said, the cards aren't, like the stapled on keyword of morph isn't the greatest thing in the world. Now, for me, I play one morph card I can think of, and that's Ponyback Brigade, which allows me to flip it. You get tokens and all that, so I can jam it out there early. That's the only upside to it, because then I can reanimate it later, so it ain't no biggie if it dies or whatnot. Other than that, the other thing that bothers me about morph is people are constantly looking at the face-down cards because they forget what they are. That's the biggest thing. They're like, oh yeah, what was that? What's this one and this one and this one? And you're like, oh, come on, man, you should just know what they are.
How about you, Max? You have any thoughts on it?
I don't have a problem with morph. I don't see it a lot, and I haven't seen a lot of it over the past year and a half since we've kind of been quarantined. That morph pre-con we got 2 years ago, I think it was more of a fanfare type deck because of the people who wanted a dedicated morph commander.
Sure.
And in the past, I've ran Den Protector. I think it's the only morph card I've ever ran, or Hooded Hydra.
Yep.
But I don't know. I don't mind it. I agree with what you said, Chris. It's it's the people looking at all the cards constantly. It gets annoying because it's I get it. You have 20 cards face down on your table and you don't remember any of them. I get that's challenging, but when it's 2 or 3, you should probably remember which one's a Willbender and which one's a Den Protector, or vice versa.
Well, and I should have used an example too in my original point about this. Because the example that I always think of is Grim Haruspex, which is 2 and a 1, and whenever another non-token creature you control dies, you draw a card. There's a bunch of decks that's a really good card. And it has morph.
What? It has morph? What?
Yeah. Mm-hmm. That's exactly. So it has morph and no one ever uses it because it's the only card in their deck that probably has morph. And so it's pointless to have it face down because number one, you want it face up so you can draw cards off that non-token creature dying. So it's a good card that you feel has wasted text on it that you're never going to use, which for me feels frustrating. I want all the value on my creature. I want to be able to use all of it, and it feels like it's wasted on that card. And there's a few of them like that. So
that sure does have morph on it. What in the world?
Yeah.
I also think the fact that, Dana pointed out, that it doesn't use the stack makes it a very complicated mechanic for new players. I get the pre-con occurred, and it's, like I said, I think it was more of a fanfare to the people who love morph, but if I'm a new player and I'm trying to play Commander for the first time and I buy that pre-con, that morph pre-con, I think that would have been the most challenging pre-con to learn how to play Magic with, because morph is a very complicated mechanic for a new player.
Yeah, absolutely. All right, Max, what's your number 2 here?
Okay, this is one that I chatted with some of our listeners last night while I was playing with them. The Tempting Offer cards. So these were from Commander 13, so Tempt with Discovery, Tempt with Vengeance.
You always take the land off of Tempt with Discovery, and you go for a Strip Mine or a Ghost Quarter because you're going to destroy whatever land they go for.
Well, see, we had this discussion, and I don't like them because I think about these cards in the metas I like to play in, which are, more optimized decks, where that's the situation where either 95% of the time your opponents are going to say no to that Tempt with Discovery, or the other 5% of the time they're going to do exactly what Chris just said. They're going to go grab their Wasteland, their Strip Mine, or that land that might win them the game before you get a chance to end your turn. I just think it comes down to I don't like helping my opponents. That's a big thing. And when you look at some of these cards, they do have similar cards in the game that you could run without worrying about helping your opponents or being afraid that they're going to get their Strip Mine and knock out your Nykthos or something. So I always compare the green one to Pier's Whim. You can still go get any land you want, and you're hosing over an opponent, or you can help someone who is behind. And that was kind of the argument the people I was playing with last night said, we get it in an optimized pod, they aren't the greatest cards, unless someone is extremely behind. But if you're playing in a lower powered pod, those 4 pod, 5 pod power, where it's maybe just slightly upgraded precons, they're great cards for that type of Commander game, which made me really think, I'm okay, you're right. It's a unique mechanic for the people who are just want to have fun and put lands on the battlefield to cast their big creatures. But I think as you move to the more optimized decks, they kind of fall flat. So I'm just not a fan of that mechanic.
I can get behind you on that 100%, because I think the only one I ever see is the Tempt with Discovery, really. Or maybe Tempt with Vengeance.
I see the green and the red one, yeah. The red one makes the tokens.
Yeah, because if they accept, you just get more tokens, and usually have a haste enabler, or they have haste already or whatever, so you just overwhelm them anyways.
The red one winds up being one nobody take for the most part, because like it's just an X token spell for the most part.
Yeah.
Because if you're in a situation to cast it, it's never good for someone else to almost to take the tempt, because you're going to do something like you're casting that and you've got, whether a Catherine's Crusade out or whatever, like them taking it almost always makes it worse. So the text is almost meaningless in that one as well.
Well, and on those tokens have haste. So like, as the opponent, what are you going to do with 5 hasty tokens that you don't get to attack with?
Block the other ones coming at you.
Yeah.
Or tap them for mana if you have some way to do that, I guess.
Yeah.
Improvise? Is that how that works? No, wait. No, that's Convoke.
Yeah, I agree. I don't think any of them actively.
Nor do I.
Yeah, so. All right, Chris, what's your next one here?
This is hard for me because there's so many of them on here that are really good. So I'm going to go with one that, Dana, I've actually seen you play, and I actually dislike this mechanic in Commander specifically, and that's Exalted.
Oh, sure.
I deem this as a weaker Voltron aspect of a deck.
I can't disagree with you.
Yep. Just due to the simple fact that I think Voltron aspects have way better protection, better bonuses, all that kind of stuff. And Exalted, you can only attack with one creature anyways to get all the Exalted triggers, so it doesn't work out. I've seen so many people try it, and every time I've played against them, it's never been phenomenal. Like, it's cool to see the little weird shenanigans they can do with everything, but it's not a phenomenal mechanic by any means. In any other format, awesome, because you can get through, you're only attacking one opponent, but in a multiple opponent format, Exalted does little to nothing for you, in my opinion.
Yeah, this is this is a frustrating mechanic because it's quite good in 1v1, and I think it's a lot of fun. I like Exalted a lot, but it's one of those mechanics that's as effective as it is in other formats. It doesn't really work in Commander, and that makes it annoying because it's likable, but it just doesn't translate at all. When I first came back to Magic, I was playing as Duel to Planeswalkers, I think. When I first started coming back, it's like 2013 or so, on the iPad, and one of the decks you could start with was a kind of an Exalted deck. And it was a blast to play. Like, you were using like these little like evasive 1/1 creatures, and by turn 4 or 5, when you would have like 5 bodies in play and it's swinging through for 6 damage unblockable or something, like, it felt really good. It felt really strong. You could just switch up what you were attacking with, and like all the buffs kind of transferred to whatever thing you were swinging with. It didn't matter. Just as long as your board state was there, it just kept stacking. So it was I just loved playing that deck. And I've tried and tried and tried to make it work in Commander, and I've just never been able to, because you have to kill 4 people, and it requires so many pieces to work successfully. You need so many Exalted creatures out. It's a much more difficult thing to make work than just putting swords on something, and the swords are always going to be there, probably, short of like a Shatterstorm.
Yep.
That kind of Voltron's much easier to recover from than Exalted is. And the other problem is, almost any of the commanders you want to work with Exalted are so good, like Rafiq, that it almost becomes pointless to, like, one of the cool things for me about Exalted was, like I said, you could kind of change what you were swinging with depending on the situation. If you have Rafiq in the command zone, Rafiq's always the best thing to swing with.
Sure is.
And even when I mess with Kenrith in 5-color Exalted, Kenrith was always the best thing to swing with. Like, it just worked out that, like, if something's good enough to be your commander, it's almost always going to be good enough to be the main thing you're attacking with. And that kind of removes some of the coolness of the mechanic, at least for me, it did as well.
Yeah, see, the thing I see with Exalted is you're the aggressor, and there's no way of falling back on defense because you don't get Exalted triggers when blocking. It's only when attacking.
Yep.
Whereas with swords or auras or anything, if you're doing that Voltron aspect, you still can sit back with a blocking aspect too.
What do you think of it, Max? You do run at least one Exalted card, I think, the land, don't you, in Dromoka?
No, I don't run the land in Dromoka anymore. I took it out. Enter the tapped screwed up the tempo.
Okay.
I do run Finest Hour in Tuvasa, though.
Oh, sure.
But that is more of a win condition card than anything, because by the time I have Tuvasa big enough to, kill someone, having that out and just getting a second combat step to kill the next player is icing on the cake.
Yeah, like that would be a good card in that deck, even if it didn't have the Exalted thing on it.
Yeah, just the ability to have a second combat or whatever it is.
Yeah, although you brought up the land, which I think is what?
Cathedral of War?
Cathedral of War, thank you, Chris. I do think that card alone does have a place in some Voltron decks. Like, I did try it in Dromoka, I did try it in Tuvasa. I think I ran it in, like, my Tajik deck when I had that, just because it is, if you're swinging with your commander or a single creature, that +1 might come in handy. And if you're in red, you have all those extra combat step cards, and Exalted does stack. So, I mean, I think the land is great. I think Finest Hour is great, even though it's in 3 colors. Mm-hmm. But I agree with everything else you guys said. Having a board of bodies where only one can attack doesn't make a lot of sense.
Well, let's jump over to my number 3 here. And that is Fabricate, which we kind of touched on briefly talking about Kaladesh block. Fabricate was a mechanic where when a creature enters the battlefield, it has Fabricate like 1, 2, or 3, whatever. You put that many counters on it. So if it's Fabricate 3, you put 3 counters on it. Fabricate 1, you put 1 counter on it. Or you create a 1/1 colorless servo artifact creature token. So something with Fabricate 3, you would put 3 counters on or make 3 1/1 colorless servo tokens. And we talked about this with Improvise. In the same set, that kind of made sense. Those were mechanics in Standard. Those servos you could tap to then power up Improvise. Some pretty good synergy there. In Commander, the fact that the servos are just 1/1s, if they were colorless Thopters that had flying, that would probably be enough to make it a real legitimate choice. But like whenever I've played something with Fabricate, I almost always just put the counters in the creature because the servos are just generally so unhelpful. I'm not saying they can't be helpful. Like if you're playing you have a Skull Clamp out or something, maybe you want to use them to just get a free draw, or maybe some kind of a sacrifice deck, or if your deck cares about the amount of tokens or something, amount of artifacts in play, whatever. Like there's situations I'm sure where it's useful. But if you're not playing that really specific deck, it's one of those mechanics where the counters are just the obvious choice, and I really genuinely kind of dislike modular mechanics where there's almost always one best choice unless you're in a really weird situation. They kind of cease to become modular then at that point.
Makes sense.
And Max, you ran Angel of Invention again for a while, I think, in Dromoka. Is it still in there?
It's not in Dromoka, but it is in Regna and Krav.
Which is an example of you want the bodies to sacrifice then.
Right. And see, I'm torn on Fabricate. I do agree it's a clunky mechanic, but there are 3 really good cards with Fabricate. Angel of Invention, you just mentioned.
Yep.
Cultivator of Blades is the green one, and that buffs your entire team based on its power. And the other one that always comes to mind for me is Marionette Master, which is just kind of like a Zulaport Cutthroat for artifacts based on its power. Those are like the 3 that probably get played the most in Commander of the 4, 8, 10, 12 of the 13 available.
Mm-hmm. But even like Cultivator of Blades, because it like buffs your team based on its power, your best choice there is still almost always put the counters on it.
To a point, I could see that, depending on how you're playing, because I mean, it's in green, so it might just be worth it to slap out the creatures. You have other buffs that are out there, whether it be like Beastmaster Ascension or something like that, so it's already big, so it just buffs your other tokens that you just brought in.
Yeah.
I mean, those are literally the 3 best cards of Fabricate that we just talked about.
Yep.
And maybe it would be too strong if it made Thopters with flying. Maybe that would be too much. But I just feel like at that point, that's when I think the choice becomes much more interesting. Max, what's your third mechanic here?
My next one is a combination of mechanics. And that is the Will of the Council and Council's Dilemma, the voting mechanics from the conspiracy thing.
I'm surprised you don't just hate all of them.
Just because you screw them up? Is that what it is, Max?
Yes, that's one of my reasons. The first Will of the Council was introduced in Conspiracy, and then Council's Dilemma was the, I guess, fixed version in Conspiracy 2.
I don't think that's fixed.
I don't think it is either. Some of my issues with it is that it's not in all colors. Red does not have a vote card, which I found super interesting.
Yeah.
And especially because red's supposed to be kind of about chaos, so I find that odd. If I had to pick one, I prefer the Will of the Council over Council's Dilemma because there is a choice where your vote goes awry and you don't get the outcome you want. Hence me screwing up every Council's Judgment I cast.
Right.
Versus Council's Dilemma where no matter what side gets voted on, you're probably coming out ahead as the caster. Especially like with Expropriate, you're either taking turns or taking permanents. And that's just not fun. Like, when that card get cast and it's not countered, the game's over. And you better be able to win. At least, with Will of the Council, I've screwed up the vote where I don't get the thing exiled I want. Or, the green one? There's the artifact one that lets you take an extra turn from the original Conspiracy. They're cool mechanics. I just don't think they are that kind of flushed out yet to make them so they kind of work every time.
I don't think there's enough of them neither, so when people see it, they know immediately what they need to do. Instead of, I could screw this up if I do this or do that or whatever else. And I like your Expropriate example, that card's just, it's a win-win no matter what you do with it. which a lot of those dilemmas were. I mean, it's like, I cast this and you guys decide you're a Fates, you know, because either way, I'm making out.
Yeah.
Yeah, I like the mechanics. I just feel like, except for a couple of implementations, they either made it too powerful or not powerful enough.
For sure. And so I get it, because both of those were draft sets. These are made to be played in a multiplayer format, so they should be cool. Like, they do work in EDH. I'm not saying that they don't, but the fact that they were designed for a draft set, the majority of them cost a lot of mana for maybe not a great ability. So like Messenger Jays from the second conspiracy is vote for either Feather or Quill, and then you either put a +1/+1 counter on it for every Feather, or you draw a card for every Quill vote. And then for each card you draw, discard a card. And that's 5 mana. Like 5 mana for maybe a 2/1 for sure, if not, you know, a 4/3 is a lot of mana for nothing else. And to answer Chris's question, there's 15 total cards with these mechanics.
Yeah, there's not enough. Like, if they came out with another conspiracy, you know, put more into it. Because I'd like to see more cards that, like, there's a couple of creatures that allow you to have extra votes and stuff like that. So you can sway the voting in your favor and stuff. That I would like to see, so you can actually play more of it.
Yeah, the ability to like mess with that mechanic would be super fun. There's just not enough of those things happening to do that really right now.
Yep.
Right.
But yeah, I hope one of the things I do know that they're looking to do more multiplayer kind of stuff, whether it's Battle Bond or Conspiracy, I'm not sure. But hopefully they will revisit that mechanic in those kind of sets in the future, because I like it in theory. All right, Chris, what is your third one here?
This is our last one, right? That we're going
to talk about? This is our last one.
So what do you guys want to talk about? Dredge, Storm, Annihilator. So which one should we go here?
You know what? I didn't even think of Annihilator. That would have been a pretty easy one to go with.
Yeah, I mean, Annihilator was the last one on my list, because I'm like, I don't think I have enough on this list. So I'm going to talk about... we'll talk about Dredge, I guess, because I hate Storm. That's the one that I hate with passion. Like, despise it. Like, that mechanic can just go disappear and burn in a red card called Garbage Fire, and we'll be all good with that. But Dredge, so I don't dislike this mechanic per se. I love it in Modern. Commander's another thing, because there are, let me see here now, I have this written down somewhere. I think there's only like 15. Yeah, there are 15 cards that have the keyword Dredge stapled on them. So there's not a whole lot of them, and most of them are creatures that don't really do too much per se neither. Like the best card I've seen ever played in Commander is either Life from the Loam or the Black Land. I can't even think of the name of it off the top of my head.
Salvage.
Yeah.
Yep, those are the two that you see the most of. But otherwise, like, the Dredge mechanic doesn't do anything in Commander really, unless you're trying to break things. Like if you're playing a Marin deck or a Muldrotha or something like that, you know, where you're just like doing all sorts of weird reanimating shenanigans. But then again, a lot of times that doesn't benefit you neither, because you're not really like doing heavy combo to it. So it's like it's a torna whether I like or dislike it type of deal.
When you see someone Dredge in Commander, you're like, well, either this is going to not do anything for them because they're not really like sure how Dredge works, or they're just going to win the game right now.
Yes.
Like something's going to happen. This is going to end the game.
Yeah, I mean, it would be a cool if there was more to it, so you could actually build a whole deck around Dredge. Like, it'd be like, I'm going to dredge this, then I'm going to dredge this, and I'm going to dredge this, and do all those stupid things like that. But seeing how there's only 15 cards and most of them are in your black and green colors anyways, you're limited into what you're doing, and then everyone's seen it once or twice, and they're just like, well, I Bajuka-Bog you, and have good luck doing what you're doing next time.
One little fascinating, I guess we can take a step back quick, because I think this is kind of super interesting, about Dredge as a mechanic in general, is if you look at the cards with Dredge from when it was originally printed, the rare cards are the ones that have small Dredge numbers, Dredge 2 or something, and the commons are the ones with like the high Dredge numbers, Dredge 6,
sure
whatever it is. Because that was a negative. They assumed in design that it would be a penalty for you to have to dredge cards to your graveyard to get the thing back. So therefore the commons were going to be the expensive dredge cost, Dredge 6, and the rares, the good cards, would have the less expensive dredge cost. So you would have to pay, quote unquote, pay less cards to your graveyard. Not at all realizing that that's exactly what people wanted to do. Like what you want to do in that kind of deck is fill that yard up as fast as humanly possible. So yeah, it's like literally they entirely misunderstood how Dredge was going to wind up working when it got played. That's amazing.
I'm assuming they're never going to make another Dredge card neither, unless it's in like a Modern Horizons type set. something that's only legal in the old format. So
how did that turn out the last time they put a Modern Horizons dredge card out there? What did that do for everybody?
Yeah, that turned into Hogak Nightmare.
So yeah, no, I would bet we never see that keyword again.
Yeah, I mean, it's a nice aspect. I mean, because I like, I say it all the time, use your graveyard if you can. And these allow you to use your graveyard for things, but it doesn't do enough to really be a viable mechanic.
Yeah, I tend to agree with that. And in Commander, there's a lot of ways to put stuff in your yard too.
Yes. And like I said, Life from the Loam is probably the best of them all because you get lands back. So, I mean, out of all of them, if someone's playing that, I'm like, good on you. You're pitching cards in your graveyard and you're getting them back. I mean, I'm good for that.
What do you think of it, Max?
I'm not smart enough to play Dredge. That's what I think about it. Everybody can have fun doing it. I look at it, I see that Life from the Loam, and kind of what you guys said. The game's going to be over, or they're going to dirtle. And
yeah.
You typically see it in a landfall deck like Life from the Loam, so you already know what you're getting into, so it's not a surprise.
Yep.
But it definitely isn't something I would put into a lands deck, even if I was building it myself, just because, I can try to do it some other way.
Yeah, well, how I would summarize it is I whenever I've seen people doing dredge stuff in Commander, like you said, it's like it either ends the game or it's a huge dirtle fest, which is frustrating. However, the counterpoint to that is I find watching dredge in Eternal formats fascinating. It's like super
awesome to
watch. It's a super fun thing to watch a good dredge player. A friend of the show, Erin Campbell, is the dredge queen. I'm like, she's known for that. She's amazing to watch play a dredge deck. It's super fun.
Yeah, I played Dredge in Modern once, and you wouldn't believe the amount of triggers that you can miss in that.
Oh, sure,
and I was just like, yep, this isn't my deck. We're going to set this off to the side.
But that's not what it does in Commander, really, usually, for the most part. It's a bit like Exalted. You lose the cool experience of it when you're playing Commander.
Yeah, I mean, I would rather, entomb cards into my graveyard. Yeah. Something that I get to choose what goes in there, so I know that I can use it or whatever else.
I hear you. All right, so those are 3 mechanics from each of us that we don't like in Commander for reasons ranging from reasonable to entirely petty.
Mutate. I've never thought about that.
But this would be a cool one to hear from people what ones they have thoughts on as well, particularly if they're ones you actually see. Again, we're trying to avoid banding or things of that nature, but I'd like to hear back from listeners, so reach out and let us know. All right, I think that's going to wrap up this episode. We'll be back next week with another show. I'm Dana. You can find me on the Twitter birds at Dana Roach. You can find Max at CMDRCentral_Max. And you can find Chris at WiseSquishy1. Our show is edited by Rafael Garcia. You can find him at Ursa Bearwalker. And our podcast theme is Retro Future Dirty by Kevin MacLeod. We'll be back next week. Until then, I'm Dana.
I'm Max.
And I'm Chris.